History is there for one to learn from. If a man does not learn from history, he's doomed to repeat it. You can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make them drink. In ancient Africa, there was a warlord, a warrior by the name of Hannibal. This man was a leader. He was intelligent, adaptive, and he was renowned throughout his life to defending his people from the invaders of the time, which was the Roman Empire. He used strategy, warfare, long before Sun Tzu's The Art of War was even heard of. More so, if we look at how little humanity knows today, one could say that ignorance is bliss. And this is why. Forgetfulness of past orthodoxies. The 9 satanic sins. A lot of people want to put the word dark. They want to put the word satanic before anything. And all this is a fad. It is nothing more than a power play. It is to make themselves look good without having a true understanding of what they're speaking on. Take today for an example. Today is Martin Luther King Day. Most people just write it off as just another holiday. But do they really understand the sacrifice that that man did? The impact from a historical point of view? To me, this man was a warlock, and not from a magical perspective, not from a witchcraft perspective, no. Hey, Black Tower, welcome. Leo, Blanford, welcome. Not for, so when I think of Martin Luther King and I call him a warlock, I'm not talking from a witchcraft perspective or a sorcerer's perspective. I'm talking about a mundane perspective. This man had courage, intelligence, he had honor, prestige. This man came from nothing. He was a self made man and he held himself above the dross of the time. This man literally went against the grain. He made himself into a living legend, just like any of the greats did. Look at Alexander the Great. He was a nobody. And he conquered most of Asia before he befell a sickness and an illness and died. The only difference between Alexander the Great and Martin Luther King is that Martin Luther King had the courage to stand up against the culture. He dared to go against the grain and to speak his mind through the First Amendment. This man inspired a revolution. And most importantly, it cost him his life. He was beaten, imprisoned, and eventually killed. If you think about it, this was also repeated in a different manner with JFK, John F. Kennedy. Most of his family has been assassinated. Let's go a little bit further up. Let's go to Bruce Lee's family. We see the same thing. Over the last decade, we've seen John Travolta's family disappear. His wife, his kids, most of his family is dead because of how they live their lives. But Martin Luther King was an example. He was an example because of the fact that it was a unique and rare occurrence that you can either learn from or not. I want to kind of just run you through some history here. Mankind thinks that they know what witchcraft is, that they think what a warlock is. When you think about necromancy, you think of mages, the magi. You look back throughout the history and you get into the old names. The languages change. The meanings get distorted. Things get corrupted and watered down, and people run with it. It is nothing more than the latest fad. Take John Ramirez for an example. I did a video a while back on him because it was requested. You have a man that was supposedly raised in Santeria and then got into Palo Mayombe. Now he's a radical within Christianity. He uses the term satanic. He uses the term devil worship. Okay. You do realize that in Santeria, people, these practitioners, the Brua and Bruo, call upon the Orisha. The Orisha are spirits you call forth for healing, for intelligence, for understanding, ancestral lineage, much like the Loa of Haitian Voodoo. Palo Mayombe, known as the people of the sticks, is an offshoot of Palo Monte. Palo Monte is spiritual, whereas Palo Mayombe is more physical. In a black magic perspective, this is the tradition that you would use to throw curses, to do personal gain. You do not mix Satanism, Palo Mayombe, or Santeria together. Working with demons is completely different from working with the Orisha. John Ramirez is one of those individuals who is a radical. He has no understanding of what the Orisha are about, no idea what the actual practices of Santeria are. And yet he's written a couple of books and people eat it up. Let's go into a next satanic high priest. I forget the guy's name. There's been quite a few. Who tries to expose the symbols of occultism, claiming to be a former high priest of the Church of Satan. But yet he doesn't go into the fact that these symbols are ancient symbols associated with alchemy. They had purpose within alchemical changes, identifying markers between movements. It would be like looking at a map today. If you look at a road map, how do you know if you're going north or south to get to any given town? state or country. If you want to go to Canada, how do you know you need to go north? Hmm. Native Americans would use rocks, put them down to show, hey, I went this direction. Hmm. Okay. But yet, this satanic high priest said Satan uses a symbol for this. Neither John Ramirez or the satanic high priest went into details about what separates the occult symbols, their different names, such as the swastika. All people today know about the swastika is that Adolf Hitler used it during World War II. It became a symbol of hate. People have forgotten that this one symbol alone has over a dozen different names going back hundreds of years. Hmm. It's like the term warlock. Modern day pagans and Wiccans utilize it to define somebody who has been an oath breaker and betrayer. You type in the word warlock on YouTube and you get all these former warlocks, these practicing wannabes, people who claim to have been a former voodoo practitioner, a voodoo zant, former palero, a brua or bruo. It's now corrupted and associated with into Christian perspectives, the tetragrammation. But people forget where these doctrines came from. It's just another era of reliving the same history over and over again. The revolution of Martin Luther King was a unique example of what honor and integrity is about. Holding yourself above the normality and daring to go against that grain, much like a warlock would do. A warlock has nothing to do with the world. A warlock chooses to separate themselves from the world because there's nothing there that interests them. I am a practicing warlock. Some would refer to me as a marimberos in the African Caribbean traditions, a necromancer. I used to be a satanic warlock before I decided I'm done with this title because people have just watered it down so much that you can't even identify where the corruption starts and ends. This is what the world does. History repeats itself and nobody is the wiser. Nobody is the wiser. Why? Because nobody wants to learn. Everybody wants to be a follower. Everybody wants to be a part of something. No matter if it is wrong, it is a power play. It is nothing more than, how should I say this in a nice manner? It is about image, popularity, nothing more. It's driven by ego. When you look at history, you see modern day African Americans sitting there, they'll tell you, well, we were slaves. Just out of a prime example. No, your ancestors were slaves, according to history, according to the European traditions of how they were brought over from Africa into all these different countries that we know them as today. They think this is the first time it's ever happened. Do you remember the gladiators of ancient Rome? Okay. What about the Hebrews who were slaves to the Egyptians? Okay. Hmm. How about the Hebrews and the Jewish cultures being enslaved by the what is now known as Turkey, the Turkish? Look at how the Turkish took over the world, or what was known as the world back in the day, just like Rome did. Hmm. Okay. How about Alexander the Great and how he conquered the world? How about the Knights of Templar, how they were known throughout the world at that time? People think today that the priesthood is only through Christianity, through Catholicdom. Hmm. Okay. What about the ancient priesthood of first, second, and third dynasty of Egypt? Hmm. The Shem priesthood. How about the Knights of Templar, who were holy monks, but also highly trained in combat? How about the Hashishin, who are holy men and women, but also trained assassins? Hmm. Okay. What about the Gaelic Druids, who were priests, priestesses, served nature? But yet people assume that Christianity is the first. What if I told you that before Christianity there was Zoroastrianism? Hmm. There was a priesthood there. You go back before that and you get all these other ones. Hmm. Okay. Ignorance is bliss, ladies and gentlemen. You want to play this game of repeat history? That's on you. But those who are wanting to adapt, those who want to evolve, to better themselves, they're not a part of the world. They walk in the shadows. Because history has shown that every person, from Wallace, an ancient, a very old man, a wise man, who rose up after his wife was murdered, to the Maid of Lorraine, and so many more, that has risen up against that grain, been that fish going against the current. Those who stood against the world have been murdered, arrested, tortured. They led a revolt, either against the English or, you know, against an invading army. Didn't matter. History has shown this. You're not the fucking first. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. Because each era, each generation thinks that they've invented something new. You think you know what witchcraft is? Trust me, you don't. You have no idea. You think that today's movements, these riots that take place, is anything new? Riots have been happening throughout history. You go back into the old world and you're going to see countless occurrences. So when I look at a holiday such as this, I give credit to that individual. In this case, Martin Luther King, because he showed great courage. He tried to change the world. And in fact, he did change the world for a time. But the victors are the ones that tell the whole story. They tell the story and people eat it up. I was talking with a coworker this morning, and even she said the governments are evil. And I said there's different levels of evil. You got those who are nothing more than foot soldiers. Look at the legal system, law enforcement. That's their job, is to enforce these creeds. but yet they show up after the fact. No one's the wiser because they don't have to deal with it. They just write a small little report. Done. Washed our hands. Wow. But people have forgotten the past. They have forgotten the past. You see, when it comes to the term warlock, modern day pagans and Wiccans, modern day practitioners, they only go by the Welsh and Anglo Saxon perspective. Liar, oathbreaker, and betrayer. If you actually look at that term from those regions, it means somebody who has betrayed their oath, either going from one religion to another or a philosophy in another. They've broken their word. They've gone against the grain. They didn't stand for the corruption, so they went their own way. Very few creeds today stand true. And what Martin Luther King stood for, I got respect for that. Nothing but respect. He was a great man. And like my brother, the Black Tower, so colorfully put it, wish we could have met the man. But unfortunately, it was before our time. So, when you think about what you're doing and what you believe in, I want you to consider this. I want you to consider what you're doing, what you believe in, and what you're following. You see, John Ramirez is a prime example. Some of these modern day practitioners who are in it only for the fame, only for the power, the knowledge. They're not in it for the knowledge. They're in it just to point fingers. They're not in it for the actual practice. They're not in it for the knowledge. They're not in it for the self mastery or the evolution of self. It's nothing more than a fad movement. It is a movement that's called a fad. Nothing more. It's one of ego. It's about prideful, being a part of something. You want to do something about something? Stand up for it. Commit the ultimate sacrifice. Look at the Agori out of India. Prime example of extreme isolation, going to the extreme of starvation just to get to know the spirits, the Devi. Amazing. Look at what the Dukan of Indonesia do for practices. Look at the warlock in modern day society. We have no place in modern day society because we observe, yes, but we're not a part of it. We watch from the shadows and we do our own thing. We are keepers of the sacred knowledge. This is what witches and warlocks were back in the day. They kept a record of the benefits of the knowledge. Didn't matter if it was herbalism, didn't matter if it was spiritualism, didn't matter if it was ritualism, ceremonial even. They kept a record of it, either through story, meaning they spoke it for hundreds of thousands of years, or they wrote it down in tomes, journals. But like all people who have risen, they've fallen to society because they were hunted down and exterminated, because they stood against the grain. Martin Luther King is a prime example of this. He paid in blood the ultimate sacrifice, his life. I want you to think about that when you look at any given holiday that you practice today. Thanksgiving For an example, the slaughter of the Native Americans. Okay? Did you forget that part? But yet you're going to sit there, stuff your bellies full of turkey and gizzards and, you know, all that other stuff. Be grateful for what you got. Or you're going to give remembrance to those whose corpses you defile every time you say Hail Mary or you stuff a bird down your gullet. You want to sit there and bitch about political BS? I want you to think about this video and remember history. The world changes, but people stay the same. Humanity stays the same. You stay in that submissive division of servitude to those who use psychology to control you. Things that you have today were around 40 years ago. The only difference is they made them a little bit better through technical improvements. That's the only difference. Black clothing, oh wow, we had those back in the 80s, like acid wash jeans. We had black clothing back in the 50s. It's nothing new. We had blue jeans back then. We had suits going back to the 20s. Hell, we even had suits going back to the 18th century. Do you think this is anything new? It's not. You're just repeating history all over again. Forgetfulness of past orthodoxies. You want to find the truth? Remove yourself from society. Just remove yourself from society. Pick up a book. Dust off those old scriptures, those old doctrines. A lot of people, they talk about Lucifer, but they forget that he was also associated with the sun. Think Apollo. Think Phosphorus, ancient Greek. The day star. You call him a fallen angel, right? What was his crime again? Oh, right. Daring to ask a question. Daring to ask a question, and he was tossed out of the heavens. Asmodeus in the Goetia is associated with lust and desire, wrath. Now, what was his sin again? All right. Go back into the book of Tobit or the Zohar, the Talmud, the Jewish Haggadah, and you see all he wanted was one woman. But he was also, refresh my memory, which one came first, the demon or the jinn? You see, even the gods are renamed with every generation. Even the gods themselves, their meanings are different. But yet, they remain the same. Interesting how that works from region to region. And people just go with it. Somebody writes a half-assed book and people eat it up. I think it's the latest, biggest fad, the biggest movement. But yet it was written even better 40 years prior. Take Donald Tyson's work, for an example, in the Necromyicon. It's more D&D roleplay mixed in with the Star Game from the ONA, the Order of the Nine Angles. But yet Simon's Necromyicon and his the books that relate to it and associate with it, such as the seals of the Necronomicon, the dead names, the gates, even, show a history, a movement of that book. More so, it shows the time of the year in which the journey began. Showed the village of where the mad Arab came from, his journey through Mesopotamia, and so forth. About political and physical disasters. My apprentice earlier shared a video of a historical building being swept away by the current. I told him point blank, that's the earth claiming what was it, what belonged to the earth. He simply sent me an emoji, and I explained to him there used to be a balance. Nature has patience. Nature has understanding of life and death, just like a necromancer. But here it is. The greed of humanity has knocked everything out of balance. You want to know why there's all these eruptions all of a sudden? You want to know why all these horrific events and disasters are taking place? Why don't you look at the time of Aquarius? Just as a starting point. Why don't you look at what you're doing to the earth? Even Biden said himself just last year, about halfway through the year, the earth has given its fruits for the year. All it can produce. Really. All it can produce? Sounds like you want to give more product to the other side of the world. Not to your own people. You see, if people actually paid attention to their backyard, clean out their own skeletons, they would realize maybe it's time to grow up. Maybe it's time to evolve and to delve into history, mythology, folklore, archaeology, thanatology, anthropology, even, and actually learn for once. But anyone who dares to step up, be warned, history has shown you put your life in your own hands. Why else would people be so cowardly and choose to follow a fad instead of doing the right thing? Just saying. Thank you, Leo. Yeah, he had a way with words, indeed. And I wouldn't mind myself being there as he lectured. Precisely, and that's what the world fears. That's why so many aspects of this world is in subdivisions, diversion, division. And he should be remembered as such. Black Tower. He's a historical figure. People should actually worship and give credit where credit is due for what he did. Not sit there and go, oh, it's just a holiday. You and me both, Leo. One thing I can't stand is a fake, a liar. John Ramirez is a liar. Most of these people that get on YouTube and do these videos showing, oh, I'm an ex witch, I'm an ex warlock, I'm an ex voodoo's aunt. Really? Why don't you go into actual details? You want to sit there and say you're exposing the practice? Like Melinda Lyons, for an example, the modern day demonolotress, this medium, psychic death experiencer. Nothing more than phonies because they don't go into details. When you bring something up, they don't they don't even know how to grasp the actual truth. I watched a video earlier today as an example. Speaking of John Ramirez, this woman did when you type in the word warlock, what is a warlock, for an example. Most of what you're going to find is Christians talking about witchcraft and speaking of it from a Christianized perspective, or you'll see it in a D&D perspective, a role-playing perspective. But here it is. This one woman said, this is what happens when a Satanist comes across a real Christian. And it's nothing more than John Ramirez telling yet another variation of his story. Another variation. I mean, we're talking a man whose story changes like he wipes his own ass. He's a fake, nothing more. I doubt he's even a Christian. He's more of a cult leader than anything because even his own congregation speaks out against him. Christians speak out against him. There's an entire channel dedicated to exposing him, showing from the age of when he got into occultism to when he got into Christianity. Don't even get me started on how old he was when he met his wife, or scratch that, wives, because apparently he's had quite a few, and so forth. But not one area in his entire history has he ever been a Satanist. Not once. He, if you look into a video called, I'm going to give you a title to a video you can look up right here on YouTube. It's called The Dangers of Santeria in the Occult. Okay. In this video, he literally shows his upbringing. Okay. How he got into Santeria before getting into Palo Mayumbi. And supposedly he moved up pretty quick as a high priest. Okay. Before meeting is and what he used to do, astral projection, going into the spirit. You have to weaken something in the spirit to make weaken it in physical, attributes, the physical realm. For once, I got to step in here and go, going into the spirit, that's a Christian term. That's a Christian term. Going into the spirit. If you were an actual occultist, you would know that it's called astral projection. Wow. Okay. To being demonically possessed and attacking a minister, lifting him up with one hand or two hands even. Let's face it, most men today cannot lift a 240-pound man or even 184 men with just two hands by the throat. You could probably do it to a woman or a child, but not a man. Okay? Now, don't even get me wrong. I mean, putting your hands on somebody else without their permission is wrong. And I'll be the first one to tell you that. Okay? Even if you know the laws of the land, it's still considered to be assault. Okay? And what's interesting here is that you go from this one video into all the interviews that he's had, his stories change. His stories change. And the only time he sheds a tear is when his books are being recognized by these interviewers. That's the only time he sheds a tear. Now, don't you think you might want to go, I'm going to incline an ear to hear. I'm going to use my eyes to see. No, humanity's not going to do that because that would mean they'd have to take responsibility. So John Ramirez is a fake, just like most of these idiots that are online today claiming to be a practitioner of witchcraft without even showing any of their work. They're not giving you references of where they gain their knowledge from. I've always held two views. One, back up what you preach with numerous sources. And number two, always make yourself available to the public because you are responsible for the things you do and say. Plain and simple. I actually was willing to sit down with John Ramirez and talk with him. He never had the balls to step foot in my domain. He was scared. Plain and simple. And his followers, he'd rather send his followers, these sentinels, to call you names such as archdemon, antichrist, devil, evil. But yet all you do is put forth truth with facts. Because the world doesn't want to change its ways. It's easier to go with the latest fad than to go against it. Let's see here. Yeah, you're better off, the Black Tower, not knowing who John Ramirez is. I watch his videos and I laugh because this man, like all these others, they have no freaking clue what sorcery is. You mentioned, for an example, I'm going to give you an example, Black Tower. You bring up the triangle of evocation connected to a circle of empowerment. He has no idea what these symbols are. He can't even tell you the difference between Santa Morte and Baphomet. Baphomet. That's how stupid and pathetic he is. And yet people eat up his words like it's nothing. Same thing with Melinda Lyons and a few others. I mean, I actually did a video and I read off quite a few names of these so-called, practitioners who claim to be ex-witches and warlocks. See, I like working with Pazuzu because he's a very interesting being, especially when cursing somebody. Ancient Mesopotamian deity of the harvest, the locust king, not to be mistaken with the Lord of Flies himself, Lord Beelzebub. Two different entities. You're welcome, Dark Tower. Yeah, I'm just going down through all the messages right now, so. I actually concur with that, Black Tower. The path of sacrifice is not for the weak of heart. That's okay. I did pretty good this morning at work until I went to speak to one customer, and it was like I was tongue tied. I couldn't even speak. It's funny as all hell. And he had a coworker, trying to slip and slide on strawberry cream cheese. It was kind of hilarious. Welcome to Mondays, right? So it is that kind of day. I get you. Correct. And it's the same thing with religion. Everybody wants to call things religions, and it's really not. I don't look at necromancy as being a religion. It's a practice, it's a way of life. It's like being working with demons, being an associate of demons, devil worship, if you will. Modern day terminology right there, devil worship. A lot of people go, there's no Satan, there's no devils, there's no heaven or hell, really. Then how do you explain the fact that so many occultists, going as far back as Eliphas Levi, has had real impacting events happen in their life while practicing necromancy or spiritual conjuration? How about the Maid of Lorraine, who today would be classified as a schizophrenic? You see it, you see how things come down. Now it's watered down to the point where it's a medical issue. Oh, you're legally insane because you speak to demons. You think you speak to demons. Really? Hmm. Apparently, you're not a witch or a warlock, because if you actually understood the formulation of rituals and invocations and evocations, you would understand about spiritual communions. They have so many ways to commune with you, but you don't listen. You don't see it. You refuse to open yourself up to them because that goes against Sigmund and Freud perspective, or modern day atheism, agnostic perspectives at best. I concur with you on the Necromyicon working. Research is your friend. It's like the Codex Gigas. I was talking with a Christian just a couple of days ago. He called me over because he recognized me and he wanted to pick a fight. He wanted to start a religious war. And I mentioned to him, I said, all these Bibles today go back to the 16th century Vulgate Bible. Now, remind me where the Vulgate Bible actually originated? All right, the Codex Gigas. Going back to, who was it? All right, a monk from the Order of the Black Robes. Hmm. Yeah, it's known as the Devil's Bible, right? Thank you for hailing Satan. Yeah. Okay, so I have a little bit of fun dealing with Christians. A little amusing with these weak minded infidels. They're nothing more than slaves to a system. Correct. That I concur with. The only people I make myself available to are the seekers of wisdom and other practitioners who share gnosis or techniques. That I concur with. That's actually true. I concur with that one as well. Because If you take, for an example, and I want to kind of just jump in on this one because this is actually something that's actually true, and I've also noticed this as well. Is that with all this knowledge at our fingertips, it's ironic how many people lack the wisdom and knowledge. When you go through something and you truly go through hardships, trials, you truly go through, how should I say this? The deadening of the soul, if you will. Because if you think about hardships, trials, events that test you, there are two paths that you take. Think of it as a fork in the road. On one hand, you can learn from it, evolve from it, or you can let it rule you. And most people choose the latter, which is sad. Now, personally, I have no sympathy for these types, none whatsoever. In fact, I tend to use them to my advantage, namely because of the fact that as somebody who chooses the path of enlightenment, true enlightenment, apotheosis, you learn as much as you can in the time that you have. In the past, I have spoken on the fact that I've lived on the streets in two different cities. I have literally mentioned people who have had an influence in my life because of those hardships. I've spoken on the tests and the trials that I've gone through. Most of these individuals won't even go in depth. Most of these individuals will go, well, I used to practice this and this, and this, and well, guess what? What about the practices? Where did you find the sources for your material? What did you learn from living on the streets, for an example? I believe it was Jewel, the singer. I believe it was her who said that she lived before she became famous as a singer, an artist. She used to live out of her car. She was literally homeless. She didn't have a dime to her name. She barely survived. She spoke of her ordeals and her fears while living in her car before she was noticed, given a contract, and became famous. You look at Michael Jackson, another historical loss, the king of pop himself. Most people, the most they can tell you about him was that he was a big time pop singer, one hell of a dancer, one hell of a performer. He ran a homestead known as Neverland, was accused of child molestation how many times? But how many people can say that he was married two or three times, that he had multiple kids with these women? How about the fact that his father was an abusive bastard? Hmm. What about the family ties with his brothers and sister back in the 70s? What about the fact that he lived in a small home with all his family in them, within it? Had mo- one room where he had numerous people living in one bedroom. Huh. No wonder the guy was so fucked up in the head. But he was one hell of a nice guy. And he took the brunt of the accusations and kept on going. Just like Martin Luther King. Again, respect to a great man. So you look at people who literally go into details about their life. Some are more public than others because of their lifestyle. But when you think about all of this, don't you think you have another perspective upon how they live their lives and how they tried to do something that most people don't have the balls to do? Hmm. Interesting how that works, right? So, yeah, I concur with you, Black Tower, on that. And yet, even with the term hell, people don't realize that there's a difference between an actual place and that of a prison. You got a jail and a prison, and then you got an actual location. And if you follow the ancient Greek, well, you can walk that purgatory, if you will, to where you can commune with both. Interesting. Very true. You do have to entertain yourself somehow. That I concur. I spent a good 6 months to almost 10 months without even doing a video last year because of this spiritual journey I've been on. Sometimes you just have to get away. And personally, I like my solitude. I'm content with it. I'd rather be around dusty books, doing me, just educating myself, practicing what I do. Apotheosis is a road not for the faint of heart. So I get it. That too. I love the silence as well. Ever since my ex and I separated over a year ago, it's amazing how I always have money and she doesn't. How my life has gotten better and hers is basically limited. But yet I'm the only one that she goes to. Ironic. But, anyways, I want you to think about two things. If you're getting into sorcery of any kind, I want you to take a long, good look at yourself, your goals, and your aims. What is it about these paths and these root workings that intrigue you? What is it about them that you want to get into it? Is it about the popularity? Is it the fad just because you like the title of warlock, witch? So do you think it's going to get you ahead quickly, like an easy button? Or are you willing to work with it for what you get? 35 years, and I can tell you, I'm still learning. I'm still growing, maturing, evolving, defining and redefining my practices in my life through reflection, complete fealty to the paths and the root workings, to the commitment that I've made to the spirits. And they bless my life because of that. I've even discussed how the doors have opened, how they've worked in the background after I petitioned them for their guidance and their wisdom. It's not something where you can just go, oh, by the way, I'm taking this oath. Guess what? I'm a lord of darkness. No, it don't work that way. And I'll be the first one to tell you that. It takes years of dedication, commitment, hardships, trials, tests to evolve. I've got enemies just like everyone else, but I don't pay any attention to them anymore because they're beneath me. I'm completely focused on me and my practices. So, yes, silence is golden. So, with that said, I want to thank the Black Tower for joining me today. I want to thank Leo Blanford for jumping on here with me, communing with me as well. For those of you who have liked this channel, I want to say thank you. For those of you who are subscribed, thank you. For those of you who are tuning in, feel free to hit that notification button so that you don't miss the next adventure, the next video that I put out. And if you really feel froggy, feel free to subscribe. No one's going to twist your arm here. You either want to evolve or you don't. You want to learn or you don't. There is no intermediary. And like I said at the beginning of each video, it's your favorite necromancer. It is your favorite warlock. I am your favorite warlock. I am a practicing necromancer. And I got no guilt about it. I'm not ashamed for being a warlock. I'm not I'm not even, how should I say this, worried about it, because I've traced the etymology back. I know what a warlock is. It is a solitary practitioner. It holds no gender. Although the most common is male practitioner. But when you get into the term, it is a solitary practitioner. It is somebody who chooses to go against the grain. And that's the most simplistic meaning behind it. Look at the hexa. Look at the strega, the stragoi. Look at the eshi, the aji, the necromancer, the shaman. They're all solitary practitioners. There's got to be truth there, right? History has shown this. Folklore has spoken on villains of the story. And I got no issue being the villain of the story. Got none. But I love it when they say, well, you don't want to go to hell, do you? Which hell? This is something I actually brought up to this Christian the other day. He says, you don't want to go to hell, do you? I said, which hell are we referring to? Jahannam, Gehenna, Sheol, the hells? If you're speaking Asian Buddhism, we talking purgatory, as in the holding cell, the jail cell? Or are we talking about Gehenna, an actual place? They have no recollection of the difference between them. And the ironic part is they believe in their Bible. Every word they say. Oh, yeah, I believe everything in there. Really? Then how come you have no knowledge or wisdom? How do you not know that the Bible speaks of two different locations? One's a prison. One is considered to be an actual place. The lake of fire, right? But yet the other one is considered to be the Catholic purgatory, where it's like a holding cell, waiting for judgment. And yet you don't know the difference? You have 15 entities spoken of within the Bible. 15 entities. And yes, that's including Michael and Gabriel. And yet you refer to them all as Satan. Remind me, which angel was it that slaughtered an entire army in their sleep? Oh, right, that was the Archangel Michael, the prince in Hebrew, meaning he who is like God. And yet 500 years ago, he was known, in cuneiform, he was known as the soul collector. 2,000 years ago, in Sanskrit, his name meant face of love. And yet it was Gabriel who was known as a messenger. You can't even tell the difference between ranks of angels. You can't even tell me the difference between a prison and a jail. and you want me to join your church? This is like Church of Satan type BS. Oh, we're Satanists, we're devil worshippers, but yet, wait, we don't actually believe in an actual devil or demon. It's a figment of our imagination. When we say hail Satan, we mean hail ourselves. It's like looking at the Satanic Temple. We're doing this for Satanists. But wait, not all Satanists, only our members. Wow. Modern day Wiccans and pagans are the same way. Reverse Christianity. Nothing more. You want to be an actual witch? You want to be an actual warlock? And get away from the BS and do your homework. Maybe you'll learn something and realize you've been a complete idiot all these years, believing in a lie. Or you can continue serving on your knees like a slave as history continues to repeat itself. But that's just the way it is. You're either one or you're the other. You cannot be both. So, with that said, I'm signing off. Have a good day or a good night, depending on where you are in the world. Like I said, whatever you preach, always back it up with multiple sources and always make yourself available to the public. Feel free to hit that subscribe button. Feel free to hit that notification button. And again, thank you for being a fan of this channel. Because without you, this wouldn't be possible. Well, technically, it would be possible. It would be a living grimoire from me, which is okay. But remember, your practice is your practice. It is a way of life. And eventually, you're going to put that acolyte viewpoint away and start actually making a lifestyle for yourself. All right. Have a good day. I'm out.